Paul McNamara, our policy correspondent. We're going to talk about the reign of Rishi Sunak, the possible end of Boris Johnson, and whether Sir Keir Starmer has what it takes to win the next election. What are you going to tell me?
Like a fortune teller, I'm going to tell you nothing is written just yet. Rishi's doing better than expected. Keir's doing not as well as expected.
Firstly, Paul, given where the Conservatives were when Liz Truss left Downing Street to where they are now under Rishi Sunak, is it quite impressive what he's done?
What are you, one of their campaign managers? Or they would argue, yes, you are completely right. It's very...
actually, I'm going to answer this question for this guy who's apparently supposed to be this political expert, for example. It's not like it's not surprising that they're back up to like 30% or like 25, between 25 and 30%. That's like their base level. That's their base level of support in this country, right? They had to do something incredibly special to ever go below that. And that's what Liz Truss did by breaking Rule 101 of politics. And that's fucking with people's mortgages, right? So the fact that they're back at 30%, that's like baseline level, right? That is every single boomer in the country who managed to get on the housing ladder through Right to Buy, for example, plus people born into wealth and generations below. That is the baseline level of Conservative support. People who have housing equity to protect, basically. People who don't want anyone to build houses anywhere near them. So the fact he's back to like 30%, it's not exactly saying a lot, really. So they shouldn't really be surprised that they're back to kind of a baseline level of support. But, there are still issues that are continually happening everywhere else because of the failures of the neoliberal policy they've been pushing on the NHS, on cost of living, on energy. All these consistent policy failures that they have yet to address, right? So the actual challenge for them is to break away from their economic orthodoxy to fix these problems, which obviously they won't fix them. But, what might happen at a theoretical next election is all up in the air because, Keir Starmer's a terrible performer. He's not likable. He's incredibly difficult to listen to, and he's very dishonest and deceitful. And I think the public will see right through that. So I think it's very easy to look at a theoretical situation where the Conservatives could do much better than we expect based upon where they are now. I actually think it's going to be a hung parliament. I do think it'll be a hung parliament, and we should be looking for a hung parliament, right? Hung parliament is the best way for us to be able to get electoral reform. So that's what I'm hoping for. But, I think it would be over-egging the pudding a little to say that they'd be surprised that they're moving back up the polling. Because we're still like 29% versus 45%. That's like 1997 levels of polling. So it's not well out of kind of the ballpark of what we'd expect from like a bad but not catastrophic Conservative performance. But, you never know. Things might inflation's rising back up again. The economy might be even worse position if Bank of England continue to raise rates by the time the next election rolls around, in which case the Conservatives might just get destroyed on the back of their poor performance. But you never know.
Very impressive what's happened. The poll ratings for the Conservative Party were through the floor post Liz Truss. They're still not great. They're still not poll ratings that you look at and think, whoopee, this has been a miracle. However, they are an awful lot better than they were. And I think there was like a growing sense, both within the party and within rival parties, of, actually, this is a Prime Minister who looks quite competent, who's getting things done, and actually things maybe not be quite as bad for them as everyone was thinking just before Christmas.
You've got to think as well, like, even outside of all of the economic turmoil that we're seeing at the moment, the Windsor Framework's a big deal, right? Actually, finally, after all this time, we actually have Brexit done. That's a big feather in the cap for Rishi Sunak, and they may theoretically go into the next election, given the fact that there's now a majoritarian support for rejoining the EU, with 60% to 40%, very high pro-EU support in this country. By Rishi Sunak coming in and saying, well, I've created better links with the Conservative, with the European Union because of the Windsor Framework. That might be a little bit more palatable for a lot of the kind of conservative-leaning liberal Remainer types, the old-fashioned kind of Tory wet voter types, away from voting Labour for other reasons, for other economic reasons, when Labour are full-throated behind hard Brexit at this point.
But does that ability for him to be seen as someone who's competent and has sort of steadied the ship, does that fit with a sense that the party is unified?
Right, Mithril.
Maybe don't look at it at the moment of how united are they. Maybe look at it of they are less divided than they were, say, 5-6 months ago. Yeah. And there's 3 reasons for that, really. First of all, Rishi Sunak's not doing a bad job of it. He is looking quite competent. He's getting things done. Second of all, they had an away day about a month ago, and they've got this campaign strategist, Isaac Levido. He's this Australian guy, young Australian guy. He's widely seen as like the brains behind them doing so well in 2019.
Yep.
And he's now out Solidarity Street. He's got this consultancy firm. They brought him along, and he had polling, private polling that was done. And what he told the party was, and this is all the backbenchers there, said, there is actually a very thin path to victory that you could tread, and the Conservatives could actually win the next election. But it relies on maintaining.
And you've also got to remember as well, right? A portion of what the supposed Conservative base isn't voting Conservative in the next election because they have a challenger. They have Reform UK to be able to beat, right? If they move too far towards the kind of, social market liberalism type framework, theoretically, right, on an economic scale, for example, they will lose a lot of the really kind of hard right Conservative voters to Reform UK, especially on the issue of Brexit, for example. So they're really getting torn in loads of different directions. Reform polling like 7%, whatever it is, between 5 and 7% usually. So a 25% poll for the Conservatives is actually really about 33%. A 30% poll is almost 40% when you include a bunch of Reform UK defectors. Now, I know there'll be some people there who've moved away from Labour to Reform, etc., on Conservative grounds, but the vast majority of Reform UK support is coming from disillusioned Conservatives who wanted to see the supply side economics continue and wanted to see hard Brexit being pushed as being a mainstream policy platform. So, in fact, Rishi Sunak, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a real uphill battle for him to come back, not because he needs to win over Labour voters, but because he needs to stop hemorrhaging votes to Reform UK, who may end up being the spoiler candidate. As Ben Habib said on GB News, that as far as the Reform UK MPs are concerned, they don't care. As far as when they look at Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, they see the same person, they see the same platform, they see the same economics, they see the same foreign policy, they see the same everything, right? They don't care about kneecapping the Tories to put Keir Starmer in power. And Ben Habib specifically said, you cannot reward failure with incumbency. And they plan to just try and destroy the Tories in the next election. It should be a very interesting electoral cycle. I'm very much looking forward to it. As you said, the Conservative base really do hate Sunak. And Jeremy Hunt even more. They hate Jeremy Hunt a lot. They really dislike Jeremy Hunt in part of the Conservative base. And they may lose it to Reform UK. And if they get a bigger profile come the election season, it will be very, very difficult for Rishi, even with, the left vote being split, 5 different ways. Although that is a very big proviso that the left vote constitutes the Labour Party at this point, which obviously it doesn't because they're not a left-wing party anymore.
Maintaining that competency, and B, you lot not all fighting each other and tearing the party apart. If you can manage that, which isn't guaranteed by any stretch, then maybe they can win. And third of all, one of possibly the most divisive characters within the party over the last few years has been Boris Johnson, and we have seen a real demise in his influence over the last couple of months.
It seems like one area they think could be a winner in the election is immigration. And I want to get onto some of the red wall polling that you've been doing. But this week we did see the issue of the small boats policy come up again, and there was talk of division, a sort of group of MPs sort of pressuring the government. What went on then? What does that show?
Okay, well, first of all, immigration is a really big deal for the party, and it's a big deal in red wall seats. That's not a new thing. That's been
You're right, Kev.
there to a certain extent forever. Last year, it was a big deal. You were talking to backbench MPs, and they would tell you, look, we're going knocking on doors. And it's the first thing people want to talk to us about. So it is a very real thing. It's not just a confected argument or a policy that they've adopted to stoke up some sort of emotional feeling.
So this is why they're going heavy. Oh, both Kevs have turned up at the same time. You're right, guys. That's why they've stoked up the immigration stuff, or they stoked up the criminal justice type stuff, because they know that it's something that plays well with swing voters. Again, this is because our electoral system is fucking stupid, where 95% of the issues go completely unanswered because they don't pander to the very, very specific concerns of people who sway the electoral calculus either way, which it internally frustrating. I find incredibly irritating because it's all stuff that actually doesn't really matter. So, I mean, if you're at the position where you're dumb enough that you don't know which party you're supposed to support before they try and actually woo you over with their policy prescriptions, then, you're not dumb enough to properly understand the issues, quite frankly. Well, it is confected by the right-wing press. That's true, Lincoln Bio, actually. Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of this stuff is being done either being confected by the right-wing press to get people riled up in the first place so politicians take note of it, or it's being done specifically in league with the right-wing press to be able to use for political gain. I mean, that's what David Blunkett was doing in the 2000s, right? David Blunkett was having secret meetings with people from the Sun newspaper for them to run anti-immigration adverts attacking him as Home Secretary, so that he could then do a whole bit and piece, renounce a new policy about it, given the furore, to try and make him look having a tough stance on immigration. It was a choreographed dance between Blunkett and the Sun to stoke up fears around immigration, which ultimately was bad for Labour in the long run, because it meant it was frozen into public consciousness. And the Tories do this the Tories do this shit literally all the time. Like, what do you think the fucking Sophie from Mars versus the Conservative Councillor article in the Daily Mail was? Like, it was literally just a bunch of confected nonsense to try and scaremonger people into culture war issues. How could he have been so blind? True.
To get people behind. This is actually an issue that people on the doorstep will talk to MPs about. So it is a thing for them. So JL Partners, who do the polling for us, one of the things that they ask about, they do these word clouds, right? Where they ask people, what are the reasons you might hesitate to vote for a party? And then you get whichever words come up most prominent, sort of bigger in screen. And, one of the biggest words in the word cloud for hesitating to vote Labour is immigration.
And obviously Rishi Sunak's made, stop the boats one of his 5 pledges.
Yeah.
And then, so what do we see this week? What does that indicate in terms of there was some within his party on the right trying to push for a more...
And it just shows you, again, how far the electoral calculus gets skewed by demographic shift, in that the only subjects we can ever talk about are entirely ones that affect people having a midlife crisis, in fucking Stoke, the outer rural suburbs of Stoke-on-Trent, right? That's literally it. Like, people who live in Staffordshire getting angry about nonsensical issues that do not matter to 80% of the fucking population. We have to continue to talk about, because these are the swing demographic. Ugh, nightmare.
Well, a stricter policy, essentially.
Yeah, so a lot of people would look at the policy as it is and say, crikey, that is quite strict. There are a group of about 60 MPs who thought it wasn't strict enough. There was still a role there for the European Convention of Human Rights, and they want to strike out that completely. We haven't seen the rebellion because there's been a lot of outreach work done there's been talk between Home Office officials and those MPs, and we think we're going to get some wheeze. They've been told, hold off for a second, something's going to happen.
So does that show, again, a difference between sort of, say, Liz Truss or Boris Johnson's...
No, just laser.
Thank you for the resub, Jim Speak. Thank you, as always. Much appreciated for the contributions, as always. It's going to be my highest payout on Twitch to date. Thank you, viewers. I couldn't have made it happen without you. So thank you very much for the support. It's always appreciated, which you can do by becoming a member for 99p, gifting memberships in the YouTube chat, subscribing on twitch.tv/NoJusticeMTG for $3.99, or for free if you link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch Prime account. It's absolutely free, and you get 1 free sub per month. You're essentially giving Jeff Bezos' money to me, which you could do, or you can drop bits, or you can super chat if you want to continue to contribute and put me in the theoretical Rolexes that I might well be in right now. Apart from obviously I'm not, because Otherwise I wouldn't be e-begging, would I? But yeah, thank you. Much appreciated for everybody. Thank you for all the kind words and kind comments. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get some channel growth this year. Hopefully I can try to get to the point where I can start quitting my job and start doing this full time, which is ideal. But I need to probably like triple my current revenue across my 3 revenue streams at the moment. So it's an uphill battle, but we'll see. Fingers crossed we might get it sorted. Are issues around immigration actually issues for the swing demographic, or they just made issues that have become part of the mainstream discourse and then perceived as issues? I mean, is there any real difference materially between how they come about? Whether people care about it, whether people care about this stuff naturally, or whether people care about it because the press keep talking about it? You know, at the end of the day, the same result either way. We just have to continue talking about it every single day.
Premiership, that this is actually, again, a competent government that understands where it needs to sort of reach across, not the aisle, but within their own party to try and make things work.
I mean, there's still been some criticisms of Rishi Sunak, like when he was trying to originally with the Northern Ireland Windsor framework, when he was bringing that to Parliament, there was some criticism that actually he hadn't done enough outreach with the party there to get everyone on board. If you remember, we thought we were going to get it 1 week. It was actually delayed by about a week. And there were a lot of MPs, a lot of backbench MPs who were annoyed that, in their words, they were telling us there hasn't been an awful lot of outreach from number 10 to the backbenches. On the flip side of that, just last week we had a possible...
So what's crazy, right? What's really, really kind of crazy is that all the people who get mad about immigration are getting mad about the idea of asylum seekers not working and living off the state for free or whatever it is. I'm like, you don't want them to join the labour force. You want them to be out of the labour force because that gives you additional power within the labour market, right? Like, if asylum seekers are coming to the UK and are unable to work, that means you're not competing for them in the job market, so your worker power increases and your market value increases within the labour market because they are also contributing by being consumers. So the demand for labour increases to deal with the additional demand for commodities, yet the amount of people looking for work in the country stays the same. So your bargaining position as a member of the working class in this country is actually increased by asylum seekers not actually doing any work. And to put them into the workforce would actually increase our labour force participation rate and would make the labour market looser and therefore diminish the organising power of the working class in this country. So it's ironic that we have a Conservative Party that doesn't want asylum seekers working and a Labour Party that apparently does, when it has the opposite way around as far as the bargaining outcomes of the working class in the country does.
Rebellion against the storm on break part of the Windsor framework. That didn't happen. Last weekend, we had loads of rumours swirling about how there's going to be a rebellion of 60 strong MPs against the immigration bill. That hasn't materialised. He's getting something done.
So could that famous red wall tumble at the next election? Well, since 2020, Channel 4 News and public opinion research firm JL Partners have been polling all 45 of the so-called red wall seats that the Tories won from Labour in the 2019 election. The results of that exclusive poll recently show that if there was an election tomorrow, the Conservatives would be completely wiped out in all of those 45 seats.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out, Donny. It looked interesting.
Great news for Labour, but not totally. The polling also reveals that voters remain uncertain on both sides, as well as revealing that there's not a lot of love for Sir Keir Starmer and his leadership. When asked who would make the better Prime Minister, both he and Rishi Sunak were neck and neck with 39%. So, can the Conservatives use the next 20 months to turn things around?
And it's really interesting how people will try and tell you that Keir Starmer is this dynamic leader who's doing a great job at revamping the party when the public fucking hate him. They're voting for Labour in spite of him because of how miserable the Tories have performed over the last 3 years. It's incredible to me that any Liberal will try and tell you that Starmer is the right man to lead the Labour Party when he's terrible at his job. He's rubbish at PMQs, he's rubbish at outreach, he's a fucking charisma vacuum with no policies, and he is already known to be, on multiple different axes, as someone duplicitous and deceitful. Like, the public do not like the man. It's very clear they don't like him, to the point at which, there are loads of polls showing that people prefer Rishi Sunak to him, yet people are still yet the polls still massively favour Labour in spite of how little Starmer is liked. And the only reason Liberals want to see him at the head of the Labour Party is because they know he'll crush the left. That's it. That's all they care about, is de-Corbynifying the party as far as they're concerned. And they do not care if they have to continually having someone who is, quite frankly, very not electable at the head of the party. Yeah.
Let's sort of flip it then. So it seems as if Rishi Sunak has he's steadied them and they're much better than they were under Liz Truss. But that doesn't mean that the polling has necessarily shifted, especially when it comes to what you found in the Red Wall, those traditionally Labour seats that swung massively to the Tories in 2019. What were the headline figures?
I think this is the only tracker poll that's been done. So basically, since the 2019 election, since that landslide victory, and you get all those Red Wall seats that have turned blue, Channel 4 has commissioned JL Partners to do a tracker poll. And we dip in with them every 6 months, every 8 months, or whenever something significant's happened, like, another government has crumbled. It is just a poll of Red Wall seats, nowhere else. So we again dipped into the Red Wall a couple of weeks ago. Had the poll.
I almost want there to be an election just so people can shut up about the fucking Red Wall. I'm so sick of hearing about the fucking Red Wall over and over and over and over and over again. It's a really, really easy phenomenon to decipher. It's demographic shift with aging demographics full of people who came from a different time, who had economic benefits from the advent of neoliberalism in the 80s, who didn't feel the adverse effects that young people are feeling now. It's literally, that's the explanation. That's literally the explanation. Don't need to do anything else other than to discuss that, right? They were always going right-wing. They were always going Tory over and over time. And literally, the only thing that could possibly have turned them back to Labour was fucking Liz Truss at this point. Like, I'm sorry. It's just so sick. So sick of hearing about the Red Wall over and over and over and over and over again, as if it's some kind of mystical bellwether for the entire country. When fundamentally a lot of these people just don't understand what's happened to our demographics and our electorate over the past 30 years. Because the vast majority of these political pundits, I'm not saying this guy in particular because he seems reasonably hot on the actual stats of what we're seeing here, it seems to be like the entirety of these political pundits still fucking live in 2002. They still live in the Blair era, because obviously they want to keep seeing fucking Blair era policies and Blair era stories and Blair era ideological discussions, whatever it might be. And some of them are so old, some of them even, their brains are even further back than Tony Blair era politics. A load of these people still see fucking mythical members of Militant hiding underneath their beds, as if every single 19-year-old who joined Labour in 2017 to try and see a more fair and just society is some secret Trotskyist trying to undermine the Labour Party from within. It's having to deal with these old fucks who don't care to get with times. It drives me around the bend. It really, really does. I will say this. I have to say this every single stream. I'm so glad that I have a kind of cadre of followers and viewers from that generation who break that stereotype. It's really, really. I'm really glad, because it gives me some hope. It gives me some fucking hope that it's not all that it's that it is, it's only a demographic average rather than some kind of hard and fast rule about this kind of generation of people, for example. But the pundits from this class, again, it's fundamentally a problem of the in-group, out-group of journalism and media analysis in this country, where the people who do the analysis, who be able to report the news and talk about the stories and choose what stories get analysed, are all from the same private schools, all from the same posh universities, all have their very high-paying jobs, all boning people from Westminster to try and get their access, right? Like, that's a fundamental issue with so much of the political discourse in this country, because they don't know. The only actual understanding they have of any life in the Red Wall is from fucking focus groups and surveys that they've done. They don't talk to these people. They don't live the lives of these people. They've never spent any actual time in fucking Grimsby or some shit. They don't know anything, right? They just have a look at poll numbers and then regurgitate them. As if they're doing trials on mice rather than talking about a very large demographic of the country.
Polling, and what the polling has shown for the first time since 2019. Were there a snap election tomorrow, the Conservatives would lose every single one of the red wall seats. Wow. So, I mean, that's not great if you're a Conservative Prime Minister, but it's probably not as bad as that one headline suggests.
When it comes to that crumble, what's behind the crumble?
I mean, the polling is vast, right? I've got it here. It's like 20 odd pages of results. It's really complex, lots of granular stuff in there. And actually, we only end up using a fraction of it on TV because it is just so dense. But there's some really interesting stuff in there. So certain things, like for the first time ever during this tracker poll, Labour is now seen as more trusted on the economy than the Conservatives are. That's a pretty big deal. It goes through 17 different policy issues.
And ask yourself why that is, right? Ask yourself after, I would say 13 years, but really it's been 45 years of gross economic mismanagement from every single party in this country, bar the SNP, right? Every single part of this country is just full of people who just don't know how the economy works, who have continually misallocated funding, whether it might be, vast privatizations of huge swathes of the economy in the 80s due to the PFI contracts of the 90s and the 2000s, and the failures at house building under the Blair administration, all the way through to the austerity budgets with gilt yields at record lows during the Osborne era, moving into the gigantic amounts of quantitative easing that paid for the pandemic that only went into the pockets of rich people that they refused to tax back. We have consistently, every single party in this country has mismanaged the economy. And people are so misinformed because the journalists don't know what they're talking about. The only party that's seeming economically credible, quote unquote, at this point, is the party who said we're going to just continually do the same thing that we've done for 43 years. What? Honestly, drives me fucking insane. Drives me round the bend.
On 4 of them now, the Conservatives seem more trusted. On 13 of them, Labour is seen as more trusted. And there's some really big leads in there. So like on the NHS, for example, 2 years ago, Labour were more trusted than the Conservatives by 1%. Now they're more trusted by 24%. So on the areas where Labour's doing well, they're doing really well.
You backed up this polling with your own journalism by going around. Where did you go to Stoke?
I went to sunny Stoke, and what was really interesting was actually every person you spoke to, they really backed up what the data was saying. So the things that kept on coming up time and time again, right? So you'd ask them about the Conservative Party. Well, they're not that fast. Ask them about Rishi Sunak. Actually, yeah, they've got a bit of time for him. You ask them about Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer.
Also, one thing, like, when was the last time you saw any young person being done a vox pop on the mainstream media, right? To get rid of, like, politics show out your mind, right? We watch a lot of politics show content on here. They actually ask young people because they are young people. Like, when was the last time you saw any young person getting vox popped on the news? Never. They never get their voices heard because they're not seen as electorally interesting because they all fucking vote Labour. But their concerns are never raised because they're not part of the swing demographic. It's genuinely, absolutely, it's like a gigantic miscarriage of justice in this country that the voices of young people don't even get heard or listened to or even fucking acknowledged, right? And to the point at which there was a gigantic youth-led movement in 2017, and they got continually derided by both people in the media, people on the street, people who are into politics, on every single corner of the country outside of the youth movement that led to the surge of votes in 2017 for the Labour Party. And now, come 2023, 6 years later, there's members of the press and people like Andrew Marr correctly identifying the young people in this country are completely fucked over. They're not going to inherit anything because all their parents are going to have to sell their properties to pay for social care at this point because the Tories have failed on that too. And they can't buy a house, they don't have any good jobs, and they've got literally no future prospects, plus the planet is burning and the Nazis are back. And they're saying, well, actually, the thing we need to do is take away the nitrous oxide and the social and crack down on social media pylons. That's the real things that issue fight young people. And no one from the politics media fucking gives a shit until now. And then they're saying, oh, what are we going to do about all of these young people with no prospects? I'm like, maybe you should have fucking listened to them 6 years ago. Actually bothered entertaining their concerns, right? hate the media. Hate the media in this country. They're so bad. So bad.
And it's neck and neck. That's what the polling showed as well. The pair of them are neck and neck. And talk to voters in the red wall, as we did for 3.5 hours in the rain. And what you got time and time again was people thinking they're going to move back to Labour. But when you ask about Keir Starmer, he's got a problem. People weren't engaged in him. They didn't really know what he stood for. They didn't know what he's passionate about, what his policies are. There is a leadership problem there for Labour in the red wall.
And see what I mean? Like, and this is not just a red wall thing. This is across every single part of the country because he doesn't stand for anything. He'll flip-flop on every issue. He'll point whichever way the wind is blowing because he's a man who cares far more about political expediency than he does about having any ideology, having any basic principles, and actually caring about making the world a better place because he doesn't really care. He just cares about getting into power and being in power. So much so, when he asked which Labour politicians he admired were, he didn't give you a single name. He just said, oh, the ones that win. And what in an age where people's trust in politicians and the political system in general is an all-time low, we have someone who is a serial liar, who is serially duplicitous, and who the public can't trust as far as they could throw him. And he'll probably end up being Prime Minister, which means people will be even further disengaged from politics, which leaves us ripe for the ability for dangerous autocrats to be able to fill that political void. Just look what happened with Trump in 2016, when they had a choice of continuity neoliberalism under Hillary Clinton and a rogue outsider who promised very authoritarian policies on a kind of populist basis. Why do you think they turned towards Donald Trump, right? That's where we're going to be in 2030. I guarantee it.
Or at least.
The red wall will be important at the next election, but it's not the be-all and end-all, right? Because I guess when you talk about the Conservatives, there's a lot of concern about the sort of the blue wall down south and stuff.
Yeah, so it's not the be-all and end-all. You're right.
Yeah, no question time on YouTube, unfortunately. So we'll be doing it on Twitch later.
About the blue wall and down in the sort of southeast and a few selected seats down in the southwest as well. Actually, it's the Lib Dems that can start chipping away at the blue wall there. For Labour, the red wall is really important. Any seats that the Lib Dems can win, that helps Labour out as well. What's more important, actually, than the blue wall down the southeast is Scotland.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity for Labour at the moment to do quite well in Scotland.
We're talking about this red wall polling and looking ahead to the next election. And one of the big things, as you pointed out, is that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are now neck and neck. And I assume that's because Rishi Sunak, his personal polling numbers have gone up because he's seen, again, as competent. One of the things that happened for him recently was obviously ensuring that his Windsor framework, his Brexit deal, was passed. And I think reading in the polling, it says that many in the red wall saw it as a good deal.
Yeah.
Are those the kind of things which are sort of totting up for him to make him be seen as, well, now level pegging with Keir Starmer?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't think this is just of red wall voters. I think this is true of most voters. They've probably not sat down and downloaded the PDF and read the Windsor framework. There's quite a few MPs who haven't read the Windsor framework. There's most punters at home have not sat down there and read the Windsor framework. But what they have read is a few newspaper articles or watched a few TV headlines, and what they've seen is, oh, that thing that vote to get Brexit done that we voted on in 2019, oh, it might actually sort of be done and we can stop talking about that and maybe move on. Great, yeah, fine, terrific. And the majority of people are happy with that?
The big thing about 2019 was that Boris Johnson was this incredibly popular figure in the red wall. He won it for them. Where's his standing with them now?
Yeah, not what it was. Yeah. And I think this was quite surprising, actually. And so this polling was done before his appearance in front of the Privileges Committee.
Last week.
And this polling was done before, on that same day, the Privileges Committee, he then went and voted against the government on the Windsor framework. So even before those things, the polling shows that Boris Johnson is now 20 points behind Rishi Sunak. He is not the election winner in the red wall that he once was.
If it gets to the point where the privilege is...
I bet all those people in the red wall who thought that Boris Johnson was being truthful when he talks about fucking levelling up feel like fucking idiots now, aren't they?
He comes back and it does find that he intentionally misled or recklessly misled Parliament, and he is suspended. And then has.
I thought it was 80% of young Scots wanted Indy. Well, when I was watching Politics Live, I thought it was 80% of young Scottish people. I mean, a large number either way.
To go through a by-election. What happens to Rishi Sunak then? Does it then start to cause him a headache?
Yeah, there's a few things here, right? Okay, so the Privileges Committee, they can come back and they can, if they find him guilty, they can advise suspension from Parliament, right? If he gets a 10-day suspension, then you have a recall petition and a by-election. The tricky thing for Downing Street is making a martyr of Boris Johnson. And I think there are a lot of people, conversations I had with people around Rishi Sunak, a lot of them feel that they would be very happy for Boris Johnson to be found.
What I find weird as well is that there's this continual attack line that the Tories do, where they'll say that, you can't trust Keir Starmer, not because he's a liar or that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about and has no policies, but they'll say you can't trust Starmer because he supported Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 and 2019 as Shadow Brexit Secretary. Yet you don't see the same attack go the other way around for Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. Why do you think that is? Interesting that there's an absence of that. When you think it would be an easy slam dunk, you're talking about, Rishi Sunak continually backing up the ex-Prime Minister who was, who resigned from his office in huge amounts of disgrace. Strange that.
Found guilty and for him to be punished. But if you get to that 10-day suspension and a by-election, it then starts getting actually a bit tricky for Rishi Sunak. And whatever happens then, they're in a difficult situation. If they back Boris Johnson, how does that look to the rest of the electorate who may not like Boris Johnson? If Boris Johnson wins after getting their backing, he's now emboldened.
We've also seen Rishi Sunak push a sort of trying to deal with antisocial behaviour, wanting to ban laughing gas. Is that another route down this path towards winning the next election? Because it seems both the Conservatives and Labour are now pursuing that.
I went for a coffee this morning with someone senior from Labour, and they were making the point, actually, like a lot of the social justice policies that we should come up with sound an awful lot like our social policy.
Yeah, I think the Shadow Justice Secretary accused them of stealing their ideas.
Yeah. And not just that, also childcare. That was the one big headline policy that came out of the budget. Labour, that's their policy.
Let's then discuss Keir Starmer, and let's go back to the Red Wall polling, because you touched upon it before. Him and Sunak are neck and neck, but there are question marks around Starmer. What are those question marks around Sir Keir Starmer?
What he stands for, who he is, and what he stands for. That is
nothing.
First and foremost, the things that people say to you and talk to you about. I've got these word clouds here. We mentioned them earlier on, right? So these are the word clouds. Most common words in hesitations about voting for the Labour Party. Mm-hmm. So why would you hesitate? To create the big word in the middle, immigration, right? Yep. The second biggest word there is leader. And then very close to it is Starmer. And that's for this month. If you look for the last time this word clouding was done, February 2023, the biggest word was leader. And then the slightly smaller side of them is Keir and Starmer. So consistent.
What's interesting as well, right? You can tell, look, literally 1 month's difference in what they've been polled on here, where in February, didn't care about immigration. Press, massive thing about all the small boats, all the legislation, blah, 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 whatever it might be, all the immigration bill going through. Suddenly immigration's a big issue. Doesn't it tell you that that's a completely concocted issue, right? And how literally from not even being on the top of the poll in February, moving to the next month, where apparently it's the massive issue for everybody about why they can't vote for the Labour Party, doesn't that feel to you like it's entirely through manufactured consent and isn't actually based upon people's genuine material interest? Didn't you find that weird? But then, the consistent thing about this is that people don't like Keir Starmer because he sucks. I'm like, he's just bad. He's just awful. Obviously, I hate him for, Labour Party internal factional reasons, obviously, because, fucking leftoid, right? But even on policy, even on charisma, even on his ability to be able to be a good leader for the party, no one fucking likes him.
consistently, although the policies might change about hesitation to vote for Labour, the one consistent hesitation people have is Keir Starmer. That's not great.
And when you went round a rainy Stoke, what were they saying?
It was really interesting, actually, because often you get these polls and the numbers are really interesting. They sort of say what you think. Then you go and talk to people on the street. It's not always reflected. This was fascinating. 3.5 hours of getting rained on in the street in Stoke, and everyone you spoke to was saying exactly the same than here. And a lot of reluctance around Keir Starmer, a lot of reluctance around what he stood for, a lot of just voter apathy in general. Sick of the lot of them.
I mean, we've discussed, the problems Keir Starmer has, but let's not forget that. I mean, he is still level pegging with Rishi Sunak in the Red Wall, and the Labour Party in general, when it comes to national polling, is still far ahead. So it is still, arguably, the next election is still Labour's to lose.
Yeah, but I mean, the other interesting thing when you look at the data in the polling, what it shows is, yes, you've got Labour winning back these rebel seats, but you haven't got hordes of votes.
Well, one thing that liberal types have been good at doing for messaging recently is talking about Tufton Street, right? It's gone from a completely unknown place, like at the dark corners of London, where policy was being drafted by people getting huge amounts of money from private donors and with these really official links to the Conservative Party, to now being fucking persona non grata as far as the entire country is concerned, right? We all fucking everyone knows Tufton Street now, and we all hate them. They are they're societal pariahs, and quite frankly, good. I'm glad that they're societal pariahs because they're all the literal worst people in the country. When I become the head of the Central Committee of the Communist Republic of the United Kingdom, the Republic of Great Britain, England and Wales, actually probably will be by that point, yeah. When I am the head of the Central Committee of the Republic of England and Wales, first thing I'll be doing is sending literally every single wanker who works at a think tank to the gulag, right? Do not collect £200. Do not pass go. You guys are fucking out. Labour camp immediately in the video game Minecraft.
Voters definitely going back and say, right, I'm going to vote for Labour. So it showed that the Conservatives are now retaining half of their 2019 votes. 15% of the 2019 Tories have directly switched to Labour. 28%, nearly a third, have just shifted to don't know.
This week, Humza Yousaf was elected the new leader of the Scottish National Party and the new First Minister of Scotland. But that leadership election exposed deep internal divisions within the SNP, who have been in power in Scotland since 2007. And Yousaf now faces a multitude of challenges as the new First Minister, including tackling long NHS waiting times, the cost of living crisis, and defining a clear path towards independence. But what about the Scottish Labour and Conservative parties? Well, Scottish Labour are hoping to benefit from those internal divides which surfaced during the leadership contest. And the polling expert Sir John Curtis predicts that Labour could take 10 seats from the SNP at the next election. Anish Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, has called for a snap Holyrood election and says,
I'm starting to think we might end up with the Tory government again, and they'll be rather surprised and have no idea what to do, much like the Leave campaign. Oh, and also the Liberals will be very surprised as well, and they'll say, but all of our sensible adults in the room, grown-up neoliberal policies that we said were going to be really good at winning back the Red Wall. How did we lose? How could we? It'll be fucking. It's going to be Neil Kinnock all over again. We haven't the 1992 Redux election. That'd be fucking hilarious. That'd be so funny. Tragic, obviously, the Conservatives would be back in power, but it'd be fucking hilarious watching all of the pie fly straight into the Liberals' faces and them not to know what the fuck to do. Be completely mystified by how they managed to lose the unlosable election, Kinnock fashion. Although it's probably more likely to be a hung parliament because of Scotland, quite frankly.
As the new SNP leader doesn't have a mandate from the public. Meanwhile, the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross says he has serious concerns about Yousaf's ability to lead. So what could Scotland hold at the next election? Now, as we have stressed throughout this conversation, we've been looking at the Red Wall. There are obviously other constituencies outside that.
What?
And most notably, as you touched upon before, Scotland, where this week we saw a new SNP leader elected. Now, Nicola Sturgeon dominated Scottish politics for nearly a decade, basically winning any election which came her way. We now have a new leader, Humza Yousaf. Labour feel a bit more confident when it comes to Scotland. Why is that? And is Humza Yousaf the kind of opponent they want?
Labour were cock-a-hoop looking at any of the three finalists for the election. Humza Yousaf, this is the guy whose most recent job as health secretary, we've seen cancer waiting times going through the roof. There is an awful lot for Labour to pick apart.
Levelling up was as big a lie as Brexit. Local Tory MPs desperately proclaiming levelling up the town has led to it booming and buzzing. The town centre now looks like 10 years after a nuclear war. Well, just like every single town centre of any kind of market town in the UK right now, yeah. It absolutely was an absolute lie. But, it did show that the electorally winning, the proposal that you needed to give to win an election was to promise some kind of public funding, right? The years of, constant pandering to austerity politics was over because of Corbyn, because he shifted the dialogue on the necessity of austerity politics. So the Conservatives were forced to kind of virtue signal towards some kind of interventionist economic policy to be able to publicly spend on regenerating these areas that were failed by lack of public investment and lack of public spending. But unfortunately, it's the Tories, so they were never going to actually do it properly. It was never going to be proper money. But, they had to try and win the election off the back of this stuff. And the fact that Keir Starmer and Rachel has refused to even say whether or not they're going to engage in some kind of, additional spending plan, it drives me around the bend. I literally asked, me personally, asked Rachel Reeves to commit to saying that deficit spending was good to get the economy going, and she couldn't fucking do it. We just hear, we're going to tax non-doms and they'll pay for everything. Again, the government budget is like a household budget. Economic lie that people keep getting told, people keep believing. And yet people do want to see spending. They want spending commitments. They want proper public investment. And Labour are looking at this gigantic open goal after 13 years of zero investment whatsoever. In fact, the opposite of investment, divestment from public services. And they're now not coming to the electoral the theoretical electoral dispatch box with a whole raft of policy ideas for public investment into things that people really depend on, or reversing austerity. And in fact, we just have austerity light, because if you're not going to properly raise taxes and you're not going to commit to deficit spending, you are going to have to commit to more austerity, right? You have no other choice. Credits where it's due. Enjoyed Yousaf calling Douglas Ross a third-rate leader of a third-rate party. Definitely, 100%.
Art about Humza Yousaf as the leader of the SNP going into the next election.
Ironically, Mark, from an optical standpoint, right? Boris Johnson's theoretical optics going into the 2019 election are to the left economically of what we're getting from Starmer and Reeves right now, for example, right? Obviously, Johnson never delivered on that, and he had no intention of delivering on that. But the messaging that was being given out at the time about the potential for government investment, as far as Boris Johnson was concerned, is to the left of what Starmer and Reeves are proposing, right? At no point did Boris Johnson ever say the line, I am going to have an iron grip on the economy. Instead, he said, I'm going to promise all these lavish spending commitments, all these new hospitals, all this new stuff that obviously was never going to happen, right? And that's where the Overton window has shifted now, because Keir Starmer has given up. And Reeves has given up on promising any spending commitments, because they are erroneously trying to attribute the 2019 loss to economic proposals rather than Brexit and trumped up media stories about Labour anti-Semitism or terrorist sympathisers or whatever. No worries, Mithril. I'll catch you later.
So, a couple of things going on. First of all, Labour are feeling that it's a lot more possible that they could win quite a few seats up in Scotland. They've only got one at the moment. So there's a few there that they can pick off, and that would be key for them. The argument is you can't just win the next general election by winning back the Red Wall. You also need to win a few Scottish seats. And now they think that is much more possible with Humza being in charge. Second of all, Labour leadership in general just feels that also if they want to lead the United Kingdom, it's not enough for them just to have one.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Scouse Raw. Yeah, Boris Johnson, fantastic at winning an election, terrible at governing, right? Really bad at governing. And Corbyn the opposite, not great at winning an election, but would be very good at governing the country.
One MP up in Scotland to have some legitimacy. They need a good few seats up in Scotland, so they're quite passionate about winning back those seats. I suppose the one thing that we haven't spoken about is that, you know, we might be looking at the territory now, and a lot of people are looking at the polls going, we could be sort of slowly marching towards a hung parliament.
This week we've seen Keir Starmer block Jeremy Corbyn from standing as a Labour MP at the next election, which does remind us also, you know, Sir Keir Starmer is struggling in the Red Wall, as we said, to convince people. But he has also done a huge job in what he's done in turning Labour from where they were after Jeremy Corbyn to where they are now.
He has, and this is really
He's done
apparent.
nothing. He's done literal nothing. Like, the polls were steadily behind the Conservatives all the way up until the Boris Johnson scandal happened and Liz Truss fucked the economy. He's done literal nothing. He's literally sat there, you know, being a fucking sentient cabbage whilst the Tories imploded around them, and then just like walked and just kind of like tapped the ball into the open goal, or like Miroslav Klose doing his best impression of that kid who always used to hang around near the goalpost when you were playing football during your lunch break at school, right? He's done nothing. He's done literal nothing. He has inherited a gigantic poll lead because the Conservatives haven't got a fucking clue what they're doing. He's literally done nothing.
In two places. So first of all, if you look at the selection process that's going on for Labour candidates at the moment to stand at the next election, you are seeing very few Corbynistas, in fact, none, getting onto even the long list in some cases, let alone actually being...
Apart from Faiza Shaheen, the single left-wing candidate, but it's not even... we're not talking about Corbynistas here. We're not talking about, you know, the Corbyn faction of the party. This is anybody to the left of fucking Blair is being removed from the ability to stand on long lists, right? People with basic union experience like Lauren Townsend. These aren't fucking radical leftists. Not that any of the people who joined under Corbyn were necessarily radical leftists. They were just young people who wanted to see hope and change. For the most part, right? There's like Action for Workers' Liberty was like the only like Trotskyite organisation who actually tried to do entryism, and even then it didn't go very well. The vast majority were just people who saw a party promising hope and change and wanted to be able to be there to support it, right? But the idea that the only people who are being blocked from standing as candidates are like die-hard Corbynites is just nonsense, because it's literally anybody who has a basically left-wing platform, again, to the left of basically Blairism at this point. Because Starmer's platform himself, he's to the right of Blair at this point, right? He's to the right of Blair. And the candidates that are allowed to be picked, they have to be people with business experience. They have to look business-like. And they're essentially trying to turn the Labour Party into the Conservative Party Part 2. And I don't say that lightly, right? The Conservative Party are entirely controlled by bourgeois donations and the interests of the bourgeois class, right? But the Labour Party, under Keir Starmer, is doing its best, is doing its level best to be a complete, second string Tory lineup at this point. So much so, we literally have the potential, the person who they're going to pick to replace Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North constituency to be a CEO of a private healthcare company. The Labour Party. What the fuck is going on? What bizarro world have we walked into, right? Which, again, as I've said many a time, the real interests were the Blairites, right? The real interests, the ones who joined in 97, when they thought they could extricate the left from society entirely. Jeremy Corbyn was a blip, and now we're back to, as far as they're concerned, politics as usual, where both parties are entirely subsumed by neoliberalism. There is no alternative, and we're just continually tinkering around the edges as the planet fucking burns to smithereens.
Been made to be nominated to be the candidate. So if Labour does very well and wins, the new MPs that are coming in are very much not from the left of the party. These are people who are going to make life very easy for Keir Starmer if he makes it to be Prime Minister. However, there is still a left element of the Labour Party, a strong Corbynista left element of the Labour Party. And should you get to the territory where you're in a hung parliament, It was Tony Blair who actually warned Keir Starmer about this a couple of months ago in Davos. He said, you need to think carefully about this.
Like, think of that sentence, right? Just imagine hearing that sentence completely devoid of context and how much it breaks your brain, right? When you say, actually, Tony Blair, right, was warning Keir Starmer at fucking Davos, the World Economic Forum, about the threat posed by anybody to the left of centrist neoliberalism. That is the state of the Labour Party right now. That's the state that it's in, where you have the architect of PFIs, the architect of the Iraq fucking war, warning the previous director of public prosecutions, top cop himself, right? Only been an MP since 2015, and telling him you have to completely purge the left, whilst they are swanning around in Davos at a swanky hotel trying to schmooze billionaires. It's embarrassing. Genuinely embarrassing. Right, somebody clip that.
This, you get to the point where you're in hung parliament territory, all of a sudden, that element of the party have a lot of power now because you're reliant on every single vote that you can get.
Given everything we've spoken about now, and mentioning the idea of a hung parliament, I mean, you can't really predict anything in politics, but it's definitely, we have seen a slight change, haven't we? Given where we were from Liz Truss, looking ahead now to the next election.
The landscape that we're looking at is completely different now. Talk to any Conservative MP, they're very fatalistic about the next state of the next general election. You spoke to Labour MPs, and they're almost getting a bit giddy, and they were trying to tell themselves to rein themselves back, like especially at party conference at the back end of last year. You talk to everyone there, and like the thing was, we haven't won this yet. Come on, we've got to keep on. They're less giddy now, and in fact, quite a few people in Labour are worried that we haven't got this sewn up yet. Rishi Sunak continues to creep along, continues to get things done, and that was the thing in the polling, by the way, that shows up very highly. His perception of getting things done is very high. If he carries on doing that and he carries on being competent, it might only be a very thin path, but there is a path that exists to Tory election success at the next general election. The numbers are against him. It's got to be said. You look at the numbers and it is very much, no, this is Labour's to lose, but it is by no means a done deal right now.
Paul McNamara, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much for letting me talk.
Well, I'm glad that we now have official evidence that tells us that Keir Starmer is garbage and everybody hates him. I'm glad. That's evidence I want to see because, this fucking... he sucks. And I hope he continues to suck even more because I want him gone. And if you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe on the YouTubes. You can become a member for 99p, help support the channel, or there's Patreon if you want to contribute more than that. Thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one.